She wed a human for peace, then realized why even gods fear his kind. They were strong, wise, and ancient, yet even they could not keep the galaxy from shaking under the weight of rivalries, disputes, and fragile alliances. Wars among species were frequent, though the Celestials rarely interfered directly. Instead, they observed, guided, and sometimes nudged conflicts toward resolution. In the heart of the Celestial Empire, Princess Seraphine moved with careful grace through the halls of the Crystal Citadel. Light shimmered across polished floors, reflecting her calm, precise movements. She had grown up knowing that her life was bound by duty, not desire. Her role as a royal diplomat was more than a title, it was a responsibility. The galaxy was fragile, and her choices could tip the scales toward peace or chaos. Her latest mission was the most delicate yet. For generations, a fragile peace had existed between the Celestials and the human-led Orion coalition. Humans were different from other species. They were mortal, fragile, and small compared to the godlike Celestials, yet they had something no immortal being could possess: ingenuity. Humans could solve problems in ways that seemed impossible. They adapted, they learned, and they persevered. Seraphine's task was simple on paper but complex in reality. She was to wed a human, not for love, not for personal desire, but for peace. The marriage was a treaty, a living symbol that the Celestials and humans could work together, that the galaxy could remain stable. The human in question was Ambassador Orion, a man known across many systems for his intellect, diplomacy, and unmatched problem-solving skills. As she prepared for the journey, Seraphine thought about what she knew of Orion. Stories spoke of him mediating trade disputes between planets with nothing but words and patience. Tales told of him calming tensions in war-torn systems through careful reasoning and understanding. To many Celestials, these were small feats. They dealt with planets, stars, even galaxies. Words seemed trivial, insignificant. But Seraphine had heard whispers among the Celestials themselves. Orion was different. He had a presence, an influence that could not be measured in power or wealth alone. The ship that would carry her to the Orion system gleamed against the darkness of space. It was a vessel of diplomacy, fitted with all the comforts a princess might require. But it was also functional, built for speed and endurance. As she entered the command chamber, she paused, letting her eyes travel across the stars outside. Thousands of worlds sparkled in the void, each holding its own story, its own people, its own dreams. Among all of them, one human awaited her. One human whose mind could shape the galaxy without ever raising a weapon. When the ship landed on the orbital station that served as Orion's diplomatic hub, Seraphine's first impression was not of grandeur. The station was functional, practical, and alive with activity. Humans moved quickly, talking, laughing, working together with machines and systems that seemed both advanced and simple at the same time. There was energy here, warmth and life, a sharp contrast to the cold perfection of celestial halls. Orion was waiting in a reception room designed not for display but for comfort. He did not wear robes or symbols of power. He wore a simple suit, and his smile was easy, natural. There was no pomp, no ceremony beyond what was necessary. Yet even in simplicity he carried authority. Seraphine felt it the moment she saw him, not fear, not awe, but curiosity. "Princess Seraphine," he said, bowing slightly, "it is an honor to meet you." "Ambassador Orion," she replied, inclining her head, "the honor is mine." They sat together at a long table overlooking the station's bustling heart. Orion spoke of the galaxy with enthusiasm, of planets he had visited, species he had met, and problems he had helped solve. Seraphine listened carefully. She had expected diplomacy, protocols, rehearsed words. Instead, she found herself intrigued. Orion's solutions were clever, practical, and yet deeply human. He found opportunities where others saw only obstacles. He noticed details others ignored, connected ideas that seemed unrelated, and approached conflicts with patience and creativity. Hours passed like minutes. Seraphine realized that she was learning from him, that she was seeing diplomacy not as a duty but as a living art. Orion's mind was a storm of energy, yet controlled, thoughtful, and precise. For the first time, she felt that perhaps humans were not just fragile, mortal creatures, they were something extraordinary. That night, as Seraphine prepared for rest, she thought about the marriage that had been arranged. She had expected it to be formal, ceremonial, and perhaps uncomfortable. Instead, she felt a spark of curiosity and even excitement. There was more to this human than any legend had told, more than she had expected. Yet beneath her growing admiration was caution. Humans were unpredictable, and Orion's influence, though subtle, was powerful. The Celestials had agreed to this union for peace, but peace was delicate, and humans had a way of upsetting even the most carefully constructed plans. Seraphine understood that her role was not just as a bride, but as a guardian of stability. She would have to watch closely, learn quickly, and trust carefully. The next morning, she accompanied Orion on a tour of the station. They visited workshops where humans and alien engineers collaborated on starship designs. They walked through marketplaces where traders from dozens of planets bartered, laughed, and exchanged stories. Everywhere she went, Seraphine saw the human touch, imagination, problem-solving, and cooperation in action. Orion spoke with each person, listened attentively, offered guidance, and encouraged innovation. Seraphine could not help but marvel at the effect he had on those around him. By the end of the day, Seraphine realized that her perception of power was changing. Celestial power was absolute, overwhelming, and awe-inspiring. But human power, Orion's power, was subtle, transformative, and unstoppable in its own way. It did not rely on fear or force, but on connection, understanding, and relentless creativity. As the sun rose over the station the next morning, Seraphine knew that her journey was only beginning. She had entered this alliance expecting duty and formality. Instead, she had found inspiration, curiosity, and a hint of something she could not yet name. She did not yet understand why even gods might fear a human, but she would soon learn. And when she did, the galaxy itself would feel the impact. For now, she would observe, learn, and adapt. But already, she sensed that this human, Orion, was not like any creature she had ever encountered. He was the key to peace, the spark of change, and perhaps the reason the galaxy's balance might never be the same again. And so, Princess Seraphine stepped into her new life, aware that history was unfolding before her eyes, and that the small, mortal human at her side might just change everything. The Orion station buzzed with life as Princess Seraphine walked beside Orion. Everywhere she looked, humans moved with energy, purpose, and curiosity. Machines hummed and shone, ships docked and departed, and creatures from other worlds mingled peacefully. Seraphine's eyes widened at the complexity and order in the seeming chaos. It was unlike any celestial system she had ever observed. Orion led her first to a workshop where engineers of different species collaborated on starship designs. Large screens floated midair, displaying schematics and simulations, while tools moved with precision in skilled hands. Humans, small and unassuming, moved among the machines with confidence and ease, adjusting parts, speaking instructions, or suggesting improvements. "Watch carefully," Orion said, his voice calm but full of energy. "Humans are not the strongest, but we see problems differently. We adapt. We create solutions where others see only obstacles." Seraphine observed silently as a human engineer pointed out a flaw in a large energy core design. The alien engineer who had created it frowned, ready to argue, but the human calmly demonstrated a modification that improved efficiency. Within moments, the alien nodded, impressed, and implemented the change. "Do you see?" Orion asked. "Strength is not always in size or power. It is in thought, in ingenuity, in patience. Even the smallest hand can shape the largest machine. Seraphine felt a shiver of understanding. Humans were fragile, yes, but fragile in a way that encouraged creativity. Where the Celestials relied on vast power to influence events, humans relied on adaptability, collaboration, and insight. It was subtle, but it worked. Next, Orion led Seraphine to the station's marketplace. It was a bustling, chaotic hub, yet it thrived under careful human management. Traders from countless worlds exchanged goods and ideas. Smells, sounds, and colors mixed in a way that felt almost alive. Humans greeted each other warmly, haggled with skill, and solved disputes quickly and peacefully. A vendor accidentally spilled a crate of glowing fruit. Customers stopped, and a moment of frustration might have occurred anywhere else. But a human child quickly helped the vendor, laughing and organizing the fruit. Nearby adults smiled and joined in, turning a potential conflict into cooperation. Even in chaos, Orion said, humans find order. We don't rely on fear or force. We inspire others to act, and that creates real change. Seraphine began to see a pattern. Humans did not dominate through strength. They led through influence, ingenuity, and example. Their power was quiet but profound. As the day continued, Orion introduced her to more human ways. They visited a school where young humans learned to think creatively and solve problems. Children worked in teams to design simple starcrafts using recycled parts, imagining solutions to impossible scenarios. Teachers guided, but the children's ideas often surpassed expectations. Seraphine was astonished. They are so young, yet they think with such clarity and imagination, she said. Orion smiled. Human life is short compared to celestials. We know we have limited time, so we make it count. We experiment, we innovate, and we do not fear failure. Each mistake is a lesson, not a punishment. That is our strength. Later, they visited a medical station, where humans and aliens worked together to heal injuries and illnesses. Seraphine watched as a human doctor treated a wounded alien using unconventional methods, mixing natural remedies with advanced technology, improvising with limited tools, and adapting as needed. The alien healed faster than expected, and the doctor explained each step patiently. Seraphine noticed how humans spoke not with authority but with encouragement. They inspired trust. They nurtured cooperation. In every place she looked, Orion's influence was visible. His calm presence encouraged collaboration, his ideas sparked creativity, and his solutions resolved problems without force. By mid-afternoon, Seraphine's respect for Orion had grown. She could not deny the effectiveness of his methods. She had expected a formal, dull alliance, a union in which she would merely appear as a symbol. Instead, she found herself learning, thinking, and even questioning the methods of her own people. During a break, Orion led her to a quiet observation deck overlooking the space outside the station. Ships glided between planets, comets passed in brilliant arcs, and distant stars twinkled in the darkness. Seraphine breathed deeply, absorbing the peace and the beauty. "Do you see the galaxy differently now?" Orion asked. Seraphine considered his question. "I see potential. I see life thriving even in places where it should struggle. I see humans shaping it all without overwhelming force." Orion nodded. "Humans can do what gods sometimes cannot. We inspire, adapt, and endure. Strength is not just in power. It is in the ability to persist, to learn, and to grow." A sudden alarm interrupted their quiet moment. A transport ship had malfunctioned near the station, its engines failing. Dozens of lives were at risk. Seraphine expected chaos, confusion, and perhaps panic, but Orion remained calm. He directed humans and aliens to safety, coordinated repair teams, and personally guided the ship back on course using both human ingenuity and technology. Seraphine watched in awe. What could have been disaster became a coordinated operation in minutes, and all lives were saved. After the event, Seraphine felt a mixture of admiration and unease. Humans were clever, resilient, and resourceful, but there was something deeper, something that made even the most careful celestial pause. Orion's influence was subtle, almost invisible, yet unstoppable. The human mind could weave solutions that even divine power could not predict. That evening, Seraphine attended a dinner with Orion, where humans and alien diplomats gathered. Conversation flowed freely, disagreements were handled with logic and humor, and ideas circulated without fear or intimidation. Seraphine realized that human society had a rhythm, a kind of harmony that encouraged growth, creativity, and unity. As the dinner concluded, Orion stood and addressed the group. Peace is not maintained by force. It is maintained by understanding, by trust, and by willingness to work together. Each of you is important, and each of you can shape the future. Together, we are stronger than any one of us alone. The words resonated with Seraphine. She had studied diplomacy among Celestials for centuries. She had observed wars, negotiations, and treaties, all enforced by awe and power. But she had never seen such effectiveness in collaboration, such strength in humility, or such influence in kindness. Later, alone in her quarters, Seraphine reflected on the day. She had entered this mission expecting formality and duty, but she had found something extraordinary, a human who led not by command, but by example, a human whose intelligence and creativity could reshape worlds, a human whose presence inspired respect, trust, and admiration. Her thoughts turned to the future. The marriage she had agreed to was more than a political alliance. It was an opportunity to witness, learn, and perhaps participate in something greater than herself. Orion's power was subtle, yet undeniable. It was a kind of power that even gods might hesitate to confront, a combination of ingenuity, empathy, and adaptability that could change the balance of the galaxy. As she prepared for rest, Seraphine felt a mix of excitement and caution. She was beginning to understand why humans were not just remarkable, they were formidable in ways that few Celestials truly comprehended. Orion was the embodiment of that potential, and she would need to learn quickly if she wished to navigate this new alliance successfully. The galaxy outside shimmered in quiet anticipation. Stars blinked in the vast darkness, worlds rotated in silent orbits, and life continued its intricate dance. Seraphine felt herself at the center of a story that was just beginning, a story of human ingenuity, diplomacy, and resilience. She knew that the days ahead would test her, challenge her assumptions, and reveal the true extent of human potential. And as she closed her eyes that night, Seraphine realized that her journey was no longer just about duty. It was about discovery, about witnessing, understanding, and perhaps even participating in the quiet, unstoppable force that humans represented. The human beside her, Ambassador Orion, was not merely a partner for peace. He was a spark, a catalyst, and a living example of why humans could shape the galaxy in ways that even gods might fear. The next morning, the station was alive with a sense of energy that seemed almost contagious. Seraphine walked beside Orion again, her mind still replaying the lessons from the previous day. She had witnessed human ingenuity, patience, and creativity in action, but today promised something deeper. Today, she would see the true reach of Orion's influence, a subtle power that even the most ancient Celestials would hesitate to confront. Orion led her to a council chamber where leaders from dozens of species gathered. Seraphine noticed the tension in the air, old rivalries, long-standing grudges, and disagreements that could have erupted into chaos at any moment. She expected arguments, protests, and perhaps even hostility. Yet Orion entered calmly, his presence alone shifting the room. "Welcome," he said, smiling warmly. "We are here not to argue but to solve problems together." He did not raise his voice. He did not demand attention. And yet slowly the room quieted. Aliens and humans alike leaned forward, listening intently. Seraphine felt a flicker of awe. How could a single human, without weapons or grandeur, command such attention? The first issue on the agenda was a territorial dispute between two neighboring systems. For decades, both sides had claimed the same asteroid belt, and previous attempts at negotiation had failed. Celestials had long avoided direct involvement, believing that mortal compromise was impossible. Orion asked questions carefully, listening to each representative. He did not dismiss their arguments, and he did not push his own opinions. Instead, he guided the discussion, pointing out possibilities, shared benefits, and areas of compromise. Slowly, tension melted into curiosity. Both sides began to propose solutions themselves, inspired by the calm focus of the human before them. Seraphine watched, amazed. Where Celestials would have imposed decrees backed by immense power, Orion relied on patience, logic, and human empathy. He understood people, their hopes, fears, and motivations, in ways that few immortals could. Within hours, the representatives reached an agreement that had eluded generations. After the council, Seraphine walked alongside Orion in the quiet corridors. "I have observed much," she said softly, "but never have I seen diplomacy exercised so effortlessly. How do you do it?" Orion shrugged. "It is not magic. It is observation, understanding, and trust. I listen, I learn, and I guide. Power is not about imposing your will. It is about shaping the future through influence, creativity, and cooperation." Seraphine considered his words carefully. The galaxy had always measured power by force, numbers, or immortality. Humans measured it differently, by insight, connection, and ingenuity. It was a revelation that unsettled and fascinated her. Later, they visited a planet recovering from a natural disaster. A violent storm had damaged infrastructure, leaving entire cities without power or water. Many alien leaders had deemed the situation hopeless, assuming that only celestial intervention could restore stability. Orion, however, saw opportunity. He organized teams of humans and aliens to repair damaged systems using local materials, ingenuity, and collaboration. Rather than giving orders, he encouraged innovation, listening to suggestions and integrating ideas quickly. In hours, water flowed again, shelters were secured, and communications were restored. Seraphine could not believe the speed and effectiveness of the recovery. "Why didn't the Celestials just fix it?" she asked, bewildered. Orion smiled. "Celestials rely on overwhelming power. But that does not teach resilience. It does not inspire problem-solving. Humans adapt. We work with what we have, and in doing so, we create solutions that last." Seraphine realized that this approach was not just efficient, it was transformative. People were learning, growing, and taking ownership of their challenges. Orion's influence extended far beyond the immediate result. It was shaping minds, societies, and even cultures. That evening, Seraphine accompanied Orion to a gathering of human innovators. Young engineers, scientists, and thinkers shared ideas openly, collaborating without fear of failure. One young inventor demonstrated a device capable of purifying water in record time using only local resources. Others offered modifications and improvements on the spot. Seraphine watched in quiet awe. "Even children here think in ways that would take Celestials centuries to understand," she whispered. Orion chuckled. "We do not fear mistakes. Every attempt is a step forward. Human resilience comes from curiosity, creativity, and persistence. That is why we endure." As night fell, the station's lights reflected across the stars. Seraphine stood beside Orion, looking out into the galaxy. She felt a sense of both wonder and caution. Humans were clever, adaptable, and creative, but their influence extended in ways even gods could not predict. Orion's power was subtle, almost invisible, yet it reshaped systems, societies, and alliances. The next day, an unexpected challenge arose. A sudden dispute had erupted between two neighboring colonies over resource allocation. Weapons were drawn and tempers flared. Most observers expected a long, tense standoff, possibly escalating to violence. Orion arrived calmly. He did not raise his voice and he did not threaten. Instead, he asked questions, listened carefully, and proposed alternatives. Using creative compromises and human intuition, he diffused the tension. Within hours, both sides not only agreed to share resources, but also collaborated on a new project that would benefit both communities. Seraphine's admiration grew, tempered by unease. Humans could reshape events without force, without awe, without threat. Orion did not dominate, he influenced, inspired, and guided. His power was quiet, persistent, and unstoppable in its subtlety. Over the following days, Seraphine began to notice small, almost imperceptible changes. Humans on the station moved with more confidence. Aliens began to adopt human methods of problem-solving. Even minor disputes were being resolved before they could escalate. The influence of one human man was radiating outward, reshaping the station, and soon, she realized, it would ripple across the galaxy. One afternoon, they visited a distant planet where interspecies relations were strained. Historical grudges had festered for centuries. Attempts at mediation had failed repeatedly. Orion walked among the people, speaking with children, elders, and leaders alike. He encouraged cooperation, suggested experiments in trade and communication, and allowed communities to resolve conflicts using their creativity. By the time they departed, the planet had adopted a new system of governance, one based on collaboration rather than authority. Seraphine could hardly contain her astonishment. How could one human, without weapons or divine power, achieve what centuries of celestial oversight could not? Back on the station, Seraphine reflected in private. She had entered this mission expecting formality and ritual. Instead, she had witnessed a force more powerful than armies, more enduring than immortal influence, and more transformative than any law or decree. Orion's humanity, his ingenuity, empathy, and perseverance, was reshaping the galaxy in ways she had never imagined. And yet, beneath her admiration, there was a hint of unease. If humans could influence entire systems so effectively, what might happen when their reach expanded? Celestials, despite their power, seemed to understand this instinctively. There was caution, even fear, among the gods regarding humanity, not because humans were violent, but because they were unpredictable, creative, and unstoppable. That evening, Seraphine approached Orion. "You are unlike anything I have ever known," she said softly. He smiled. "Humans have always been underestimated, but our strength is not in domination. It is in problem-solving, in creating solutions, in working together. That is why we endure. That is why we thrive. That is why we are feared." Seraphine nodded slowly. She was beginning to understand. Orion's influence was invisible yet undeniable. It did not rely on fear or awe, but on inspiration, cooperation, and ingenuity. Even gods might hesitate before confronting such power, not because it was loud, but because it was subtle, unstoppable, and transformative. As she prepared for rest that night, Seraphine realized that the galaxy itself was entering a new era. One human, using only his mind, his creativity, and his empathy, could reshape alliances, resolve conflicts, and inspire growth across worlds. The implications were staggering, and she was witnessing them firsthand. For the first time, Seraphine felt not just curiosity, but a deep respect and cautious awe. Orion was not a ruler, not a warrior, not a god. He was human. And humans, she now understood, were capable of extraordinary things. The stars outside the station gleamed like 1,000 silent witnesses, and Seraphine felt a thrill and a shiver of realization. History was being rewritten, not with weapons or power, but with ingenuity, cooperation, and relentless human spirit. And she knew, with certainty, that the days ahead would reveal even more. Orion's influence was growing, and the galaxy would feel its impact in ways even the Celestials could not yet imagine. The celestial archives had always been filled with certainty. Knowledge of stars, planets, and life forms stretched back for millennia, cataloged by beings who had seen the rise and fall of entire civilizations. Yet in all of that ancient knowledge, there was a single truth that unsettled even the wisest of celestials. Humans were unlike anything they had encountered. Princess Seraphine understood this more clearly with each passing day. She had witnessed Ambassador Orion's ingenuity, patience, and subtle influence. She had seen him resolve disputes, rebuild worlds, and inspire cooperation where others had failed. And now, she was beginning to understand the deeper reason why even the gods seemed to hesitate before human potential. It started with a small council meeting. Leaders from 3 different star systems had gathered to discuss trade agreements, but old tensions flared almost immediately. Arguments that had lasted decades began again, and Seraphine felt the familiar unease of diplomacy at its most fragile. Celestials observing remotely would have expected delays, stalemates, and perhaps an intervention. Orion, however, smiled calmly. He did not interrupt or assert dominance. Instead, he asked questions simple, direct, but profound. "What do you need to thrive?" he asked one leader. "What are your concerns and how can we solve them together?" His words were ordinary, yet their effect was extraordinary. Each representative began to speak not in accusations or complaints, but in solutions. They suggested compromises, alternatives, and collaborations. By the end of the meeting, the trade agreements were not only settled but improved, with benefits none of the leaders had initially imagined. Seraphine watched silently, awe mixing with unease. Orion did not rely on power, fear, or authority. His influence was subtle, almost invisible, but unstoppable. It was the human way. Creativity, empathy, and understanding combined to reshape outcomes in ways no force could achieve. Later, Seraphine accompanied Orion to a nearby colony suffering from energy shortages. The situation was dire. Most would have called it unsolvable without advanced technology or massive intervention. Orion walked calmly through the colony, listening to workers, engineers, and local leaders. He asked questions, observed, and suggested simple adjustments. Within hours, power grids were stabilized, water was flowing, and the colony's systems operated more efficiently than they had in years. Seraphine realized something unsettling. Orion's power did not come from technology or weapons. It came from insight, observation, and collaboration. A single human could reshape entire systems without imposing force. That evening, Seraphine returned to her quarters, her thoughts restless. She had known humans were clever, but she had not realized the scope of their potential. A god could destroy planets or create storms, but a human could change minds, rebuild societies, and redirect entire civilizations with nothing more than ingenuity. The following day brought an even more striking revelation. Orion led Seraphine to a neutral star system where old rivals, the Amari and the Zyrth, had long clashed over border disputes. Celestials had watched this conflict for centuries, unsure if mortal compromise was even possible. Orion spoke with each side privately, then brought them together in a neutral chamber. Unlike previous mediators, he did not lecture, threaten, or demand submission. Instead, he proposed experiments, shared resource management, cooperative infrastructure projects, and open communication channels. The Amari and Zyrth representatives were skeptical, even resistant. Yet Orion's calm patience, logical reasoning, and encouragement allowed them to test each idea without fear of failure. Within days, the two civilizations began to trust each other, discovering solutions that had eluded countless generations. Seraphine observed, stunned. One human had achieved in days what centuries of celestial observation had failed to accomplish. She realized why gods feared humans, not for their strength, but for their unpredictable, unstoppable ability to create change. They did not rely on force, intimidation, or immortality. Their power was quiet, persistent, and transformative. As they left the system, Seraphine spoke quietly to Orion. I see now why even the gods hesitate. Your influence is unlike anything else. It is subtle yet unstoppable. Orion looked thoughtful. Humans have always been underestimated. We do not conquer with armies. We do not command with authority. We endure, we create, and we inspire. That is our true strength. Seraphine considered this. In her youth, she had believed in the superiority of celestials, their knowledge, their power, their immortality. Yet Orion's methods were different, and perhaps even superior in subtle ways. Where gods relied on overwhelming force, humans relied on innovation, cooperation, and courage. The following week, Seraphine accompanied Orion to a research outpost on a distant moon. Scientists there struggled to stabilize a newly discovered energy source. Previous attempts had failed, and many believed the resource was too volatile to harness safely. Orion spent hours observing the equipment, listening to the scientists' ideas, and testing small adjustments. He suggested modifications that seemed simple, almost obvious, but no one had thought of them before. Within a day, the energy source stabilized, producing more power than expected. The scientists were elated, and Seraphine could see the subtle smile on Orion's face. This is what humans do, he said softly. We take problems that seem impossible and find solutions, not with force, not with authority, but with thought, patience, and collaboration. That is why we endure. That is why we are respected and feared. Seraphine's admiration deepened, yet it was tempered by caution. She had seen the potential for human influence to reshape entire systems, and she realized the Celestials' unease was justified. Humans were not predictable. Their ingenuity could alter the balance of power in ways even gods could not foresee. That night, she wandered the observation deck, looking at the stars. She thought about Orion, about humans, and about the galaxy itself. Everything seemed connected in ways she had not understood before. The subtle power of humanity was like a current flowing through the galaxy, invisible but unstoppable. The next challenge came unexpectedly. A rogue fleet from a distant system threatened a border colony. Their technology was advanced, and they had a history of aggression. Most would have called for celestial intervention. Orion, however, approached the situation differently. He communicated with the fleet, proposing solutions that addressed their needs while respecting the colony's rights. He offered trade, cooperation, and shared benefits instead of threats. Within hours, the rogue fleet withdrew, not out of fear but out of reasoning and mutual interest. Seraphine was amazed. A human had prevented what could have been a war, simply by understanding, negotiating, and inspiring cooperation. The incident left a profound impression on her. Humans did not need weapons to wield influence. Their power was invisible, yet transformative. Even celestials, with all their might, could not predict or control it. Over the next few days, Seraphine began noticing subtle changes in the station. Humans were more confident, aliens were more cooperative, and disputes were resolved before they could escalate. Orion's influence was radiating outward, reshaping societies quietly but decisively. She realized a truth that both thrilled and unsettled her. The galaxy was changing, not because of force or fear, but because of human ingenuity and persistence. One human, Orion, could alter the course of history, inspire civilizations, and reshape the balance of power. That evening, Seraphine stood on the observation deck once more. She looked at Orion, who was speaking with a group of engineers, and felt a mixture of awe, respect, and cautious fear. She understood now why even gods hesitated before humanity. Their strength was subtle, relentless, and impossible to control. She thought of her duties, of her role as a princess and diplomat. She realized that her allegiance was not only to her people, but also to a new understanding of power, a power that did not come from fear, domination, or immortality, but from creativity, cooperation, and courage. The stars outside seemed brighter than usual, and Seraphine felt a thrill of anticipation. The galaxy was entering a new era, one in which humans would shape events in ways that even celestials could not predict. And she, standing beside Orion, was witnessing the beginning of that transformation. In that moment, Seraphine understood. Humans were not merely mortal creatures. They were catalysts, innovators, and builders. They could inspire change, resolve conflicts, and influence civilizations with a subtlety that gods could respect and fear. And she knew, deep in her heart, that Orion was only the beginning. Humanity's true power was far greater than any single achievement she had witnessed. The galaxy itself was about to feel the full weight of their potential, and the Celestials would watch with a mixture of admiration, caution, and awe. The galaxy was changing, and Princess Seraphine could feel it in every star, every planet, and every being she encountered. The subtle influence of humanity, embodied in Ambassador Orion, had begun to reshape alliances, societies, and even the thoughts of beings long accustomed to ancient traditions. What had begun as a diplomatic marriage for peace had grown into something far more profound, a quiet revolution of ingenuity, collaboration, and hope. Seraphine walked through the central hub of the Orion station, observing the activity with a mixture of pride and awe. Humans moved among alien species with ease, sharing ideas, solving problems, and creating solutions that were as inventive as they were practical. Everywhere she looked, Orion's influence was visible, not as a decree or command, but as inspiration. Humans were working together, teaching each other, and encouraging innovation in ways that reshaped entire systems without force or threat. Orion approached her, smiling. "The galaxy is alive with possibility," he said. "Every problem is an opportunity, every challenge a chance to grow. That is how humans thrive." Seraphine nodded. She had seen this firsthand. Resource conflicts resolved with collaboration, feuds ended with dialogue, and failing systems restored through creativity. Even beings who had once doubted humanity were beginning to trust, to cooperate, and to see the value of human ingenuity. Their first stop was a planet in the outer rim, one that had suffered centuries of neglect. Its cities were fragmented, its economy weak, and its people distrustful of one another. Previous interventions by the Celestials had offered temporary relief, but nothing lasting. Orion arrived, not with armies or orders, but with a plan to empower the people themselves. He gathered local leaders, scientists, and citizens in the central square. "We are not here to dictate," he explained. "We are here to work with you, to share ideas, and to create solutions together. Your knowledge, your creativity, and your courage will shape your future." Seraphine watched as the people hesitated at first, unsure of this approach. But Orion's calm patience and encouragement began to inspire them. He suggested projects that relied on human ingenuity and local resources: water purification systems, energy grids, community farming initiatives, and transportation networks that could connect the planet's scattered cities. By the end of the week, the planet's transformation was already visible. Water flowed steadily, energy grids hummed efficiently, and communities worked together to rebuild infrastructure. Where there had been distrust, cooperation flourished. Seraphine could not help but marvel. A human, without force, without weapons, had created lasting change in a place long considered beyond repair. The news of these achievements spread quickly. Neighboring systems began requesting guidance and assistance, curious to see how human methods could improve their worlds. Even the Celestials, watching from their distant citadels, observed with a mix of admiration and concern. They had long underestimated humans, assuming their mortality and fragility limited their impact. Now, it was clear that humans possessed a form of power that transcended conventional understanding, a power rooted in ingenuity, collaboration, and adaptability. Seraphine accompanied Orion on these missions, witnessing the effects firsthand. On one planet, a young human engineer helped an alien city develop renewable energy solutions using only local materials. On another, a team of humans and aliens created a transportation network connecting dozens of remote colonies. In each case, Orion guided, encouraged, and inspired, never imposing, always collaborating. It was in these moments that Seraphine truly understood why humans were both respected and feared. They could reshape entire civilizations without dominance, conquer challenges without armies, and influence minds without coercion. Even celestials, for all their power, would hesitate to interfere with such subtle, unstoppable influence. One evening, as they rested aboard the station, Seraphine turned to Orion. "I see now why your kind is unlike anything we have ever encountered. Your influence grows not through fear but through creativity, empathy, and cooperation. It is astonishing." Orion smiled softly. "Humans are underestimated because we do not rely on force, but that is our greatest strength. We inspire, we adapt, and we endure. That is why we thrive, and why the galaxy responds to us in ways even gods cannot predict." Seraphine nodded, reflecting on the journey so far. She had come to the Orion system expecting a duty-bound marriage, a simple alliance of convenience. Instead, she had discovered a force more profound than any weapon or decree. She had seen entire systems restored, disputes resolved, and cultures inspired, all through the ingenuity and resilience of humans. The next challenge arrived in the form of a multi-system crisis. A massive trade network spanning dozens of planets had collapsed due to logistical failures, resource shortages, and mistrust between species. Previous attempts to repair it had failed repeatedly, and many had lost hope. Orion approached the problem as he always did, with observation, collaboration, and patience. He convened representatives from every affected system, listening carefully to their needs and concerns. Then he guided them to co-create solutions, new transport routes, resource-sharing agreements, and innovative communication systems that allowed each world to contribute effectively. Seraphine observed the transformation with awe. What might have taken centuries under traditional celestial management was being resolved in weeks. Humans, working together with other species, were creating systems that were not only efficient but resilient, adaptable, and lasting. As the crisis subsided, Seraphine realized something profound. Orion's influence was not confined to immediate results. By inspiring cooperation, ingenuity, and trust, he was reshaping the way civilizations thought, planned, and acted. Entire cultures were evolving not through force but through empowerment. Word of these successes reached the Celestials. Some were impressed, others cautious, and a few were openly wary. They recognized a pattern. Humans, with their creativity and resilience, could achieve results that even the gods struggled to accomplish. They did not rely on overwhelming power. They relied on innovation, collaboration, and adaptability. Seraphine understood now that the marriage she had entered was more than a symbol. It was a bridge to a new era, one in which humans would redefine the galaxy's future. She felt a mixture of pride, awe, and a hint of fear, not for Orion, but for the potential that humanity represented. In the weeks that followed, Seraphine accompanied Orion on numerous missions. They mediated disputes, rebuilt failing systems, and introduced new methods of collaboration to species previously thought incompatible. Everywhere they went, humans inspired growth, creativity, and trust. One day, they arrived at a world on the brink of civil unrest. Decades of internal strife had left the planet fragmented and distrustful. Orion walked among the citizens, listening, observing and asking questions. Slowly, he encouraged small projects that required cooperation, rebuilding infrastructure, creating community centers, and establishing open dialogue between rival factions. By the time they departed, the planet was transformed. Communities that had once fought now worked together, inspired by human methods of collaboration and problem-solving. Seraphine realized the full magnitude of what she had been witnessing. A single human mind, guided by empathy and ingenuity, could inspire lasting peace and progress across entire civilizations. That night, Seraphine stood on the observation deck, gazing at the stars. She reflected on the journey she had taken, from duty-bound princess to witness of human potential. Orion had not only preserved peace, he had transformed the galaxy in ways no one, not even the Celestials, could have predicted. She thought about the Celestials' quiet unease. They had long measured power in terms of force, influence, or knowledge. Yet humans wielded a different kind of power, subtle, enduring, and unstoppable. It was a force that inspired, solved, and reshaped. It did not need weapons, armies, or immortality. It only needed creativity, courage, and the willingness to work together. Seraphine understood fully now. The galaxy had entered a new cosmic order, one in which humans would play a central role. They would not dominate through fear or force, but they would lead through innovation, empathy, and cooperation. Their influence was subtle, yet profound, and the balance of power had shifted in ways even gods could not control. She turned to Orion, who stood beside her, watching the stars. "You have done more than I could have imagined," she said softly. "You have changed the galaxy, not through strength, but through your mind, your courage, and your humanity." Orion smiled, his expression calm yet full of energy. "Humans have always had potential. We endure, we create, and we inspire. The galaxy responds not to power alone, but to those who solve problems, who unite others, and who persevere. That is the true measure of influence." Seraphine nodded, feeling both awe and resolve. She had entered this marriage for peace, but she had found a partnership that could reshape history. Together, she and Orion were not just diplomats or leaders. They were witnesses and participants in a transformation that would define the future of the galaxy. As the stars shimmered outside, Seraphine realized that history itself was being rewritten. Entire civilizations were evolving, alliances were being strengthened, and conflicts were being resolved, not through force or fear, but through human ingenuity, collaboration, and resilience. The Celestials would watch, wary and amazed. The galaxy would flourish, guided by creativity and cooperation. And humanity, small and mortal though it was, would stand at the center of a new era, one defined not by domination, but by the unstoppable, transformative power of human spirit. For Princess Seraphine, the journey had revealed a truth she could not ignore. Humans were extraordinary. Their influence was profound, and the galaxy had only begun to understand what they were capable of. And so the alliance was secured, peace was strengthened, and a new cosmic order emerged. One human, one mind, had demonstrated why even gods might hesitate before humanity. One human had reshaped the galaxy, not with power but with ingenuity, empathy, and vision. The stars outside glimmered in quiet approval, and Seraphine smiled, knowing that the galaxy had entered a new age, one in which humanity would inspire, innovate, and endure.